I'm just a grandmother. But to them, I was a stepping stone, a silent servant, a woman whose kindness they mistook for weakness. That's how it started. Not with a scream. Not even a fight. Just silence so thick, so rehearsed, that it became the language of my everyday life. They didn't need to steal everything from me all at once. They took it piece by piece, my savings, my home, my name, my voice, and I let them. Because when it's your family, your own children, the ones you carried in your arms and raised on casseroles and bedtime stories, you don't expect them to betray you. But mine did. I was 68 when I handed over control of my finances to my daughter and her husband. It was supposed to be temporary. They said it was just until we sort out the taxes, Mom. Rob had always been good with numbers. Susan. She was always tired. 2 kids, a mortgage, a husband working double shifts. I don't want you to stress about bills, Mom, she said one night. Just enjoy your time. You deserve it. I believed her. I handed them everything. The house deed, the retirement accounts, even the passwords. Because love makes you blind. And trust. Well, trust makes you vulnerable. At first, everything seemed fine. They paid the bills. They brought the grandkids over on Sundays. They took me out for lunch once a month. But then the calls stopped coming. The visits slowed. And the bank statements, they disappeared entirely. One day I walked into the pharmacy and my card was declined. I laughed it off. There must be a mistake, I told the cashier. But it wasn't. When I got home, I called Susan. No answer. I texted Rob. Left voicemails. Nothing. It wasn't until I walked into the bank myself, heart-pounding hands, shaking, that I learned the truth. My account had been emptied. The house title had been transferred. And I was no longer the owner of my own life. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my security, my independence, and worst of all, my trust. I sat on my porch that night with a blanket over my knees and a knot in my chest. The wind blew softly, but it felt cruel somehow, like the world had turned without me. And I whispered, they took everything from me. But they didn't take me. Not yet, because I was still breathing, still standing, still Ruth. And Ruth had one thing they hadn't counted on. Fire. You don't feel the theft all at once. At first it looks like love. It sounds like, let us help you, Mom. It smells like home-cooked meals brought in Tupperware containers like the ones I used to pack for them. I thought it was care. But it was a campaign. A slow, strategic erasure of everything I'd built. When Susan and Rob first started managing my money, I felt relieved. I had always done everything on my own, budgeting, paying the bills, fixing what I could, and going without what I couldn't. So when they offered, I thought, maybe this is what growing older is supposed to feel like, letting your children carry you for once. But looking back, I see it clearer now. They didn't want to carry me. They wanted to cash me out. The first red flag came wrapped in kindness. Rob suggested I downsize. Big house for one woman, Ruth, he said, sipping my coffee like it belonged to him. We could sell it. Use the equity to get you something easier, closer to us even. I hesitated. I've lived here for 37 years, he smiled, and you've earned the right to not lift another shovel full of snow. It made sense, didn't it? What he didn't say, they'd already found a buyer. Behind my back, I signed the transfer papers thinking they were refinancing documents. Susan said, it's just legal mumbo-jumbo. And I believed her. After the house came the accounts. Rob switched everything to online banking. It's safer this way, he told me. Less paper, less risk. It was more risk for me. I stopped getting statements, stopped receiving notifications. When I asked, he said, we've got it under control. That word again, control. It wasn't a helping hand anymore. It was a leash. They still visited on holidays. Still brought me a scarf for Christmas, a candle for my birthday. Still let the kids hug me briefly, distractedly, before running off to their phones. But something was different. There was a distance now. Not just physical, but emotional. Like I was no longer their mother. I was a chore. I found out what they'd done because the utilities got cut off. One moment, I was boiling water for tea, the next nothing. Cold, still, quiet. And that silence was louder than any confrontation. Because it said, you've been erased. I called the bank, confirmed the truth. Every account drained. Retirement gone. Pension redirected. Then I called Susan. I didn't yell. Didn't cry. I just asked why. And she said, Mom, you always told us everything would be ours one day. We just needed it sooner. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room, bare stripped, echoing with the ghosts of years I'd given away. I didn't scream, didn't sob. I just whispered, "They took everything, but not my spirit. Not yet." And that's when the whisper inside me became something else. Not a cry for help. A vow. You'd think the worst part was the betrayal. But no, the worst part was having to ask. After everything I had given them, my time, my trust, my home, I had to stand in my own kitchen and ask my daughter if I could stay, just until we sorted things out. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "There's no space, Mom. The boys need their rooms. And Rob? He's under a lot of pressure at work." I looked at her, this woman. I had raised this child. I once rocked through croup and growing pains, and I realized she had already moved on. I was no longer her mother. I was an inconvenience, a reminder of everything she didn't want to be responsible for. So I did what I'd always done. I swallowed the pain. I nodded, said I understood, even smiled. And then I went home, if you could still call it that, and I packed what little I had left. A few clothes, my Bible, a cracked photo frame with the last picture of me and my late husband, and my dignity. That's what I told myself I would not leave behind. I moved into a small room at a local community shelter. It wasn't fancy. It smelled like bleach and overcooked rice, but it was warm, and it was mine, at least for the moment. The women there were like ghosts at first, quiet, guarded, like me. Until one night, over bland soup and metal trays, one of them looked up and asked, "What are you in for?" I laughed, bitter and sharp, trusting the wrong people. And the whole table nodded, because we all knew that story. Her name was Margaret, 74. She'd lost her house to her son's gambling debts. Another woman, Jo, had been tricked into signing over power of attorney to her nephew. One had even been forced into a care home while her family sold her land. And suddenly, I wasn't alone. We weren't broken. We were angry. We were awake. We were done being silent. I began helping around the shelter, organizing supply closets, leading morning prayers, reading letters out loud for women whose eyesight had failed, but whose hearts hadn't. And with every act of service, I felt the old me, the real me, start to return. Not the woman who smiled while being robbed blind. Not the woman who said I'm fine when she wasn't. The woman who built a life from nothing before. The woman who could do it again. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "They took my money, my home, my name on paper, but they will not take my spirit." I packed that with me, and I'm going to build again, brick by brick, starting with me. Because when they push you to the ground and you still get up, that's not weakness. That's the beginning of power. There's no manual for rebuilding your life when you're 70 years old. There's no checklist, no hotline. Just cold mornings, lukewarm coffee, and the quiet ache in your bones that whispers, "You shouldn't have to be doing this again." But I was. And somehow, I was still standing. I spent my days helping at the shelter, but I started sneaking out in the early mornings before the others even stirred. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was hungry for purpose. I'd walk to the public library, log onto the old desktop computer, and search how to get housing for elderly women, how to reclaim stolen retirement, legal aid for elder abuse victims. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't sit still. Because stillness is where they win. That's where the world forgets you. At the library, I met Hector, 78, wore a fedora like it was 1949, used to be a union lawyer. He saw me fumbling through printouts and said, "You reading or rebuilding?" I smiled. Both. He chuckled and slid a file across the table. Inside was a list of local services, free legal clinics, housing options, food banks, even emotional support groups for women like me. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're not the first, but you can be the loudest." And something inside me stirred, because I had been quiet for so long. That week, I filed paperwork to open a case against Susan and Rob. Not for revenge, for restoration. For every woman who had been pushed out of her own home. For every mother discarded after her usefulness expired. And for me, the lawyers were kind but cautious. "Family cases like this are tricky," one said. "I understand," I replied, "but I'm not backing down. They took everything from me, but I still had my voice." And now I was using it. Back at the shelter, I started leading evening story circles. Not lectures, not advice. Just stories. Women sharing their pain out loud, some for the first time in decades. And as we spoke, the shame began to fall away. Because shame thrives in silence. But healing begins with truth. One night, Joe asked me, "Do you think they'll ever be sorry?" And I said, "I don't care if they're sorry. I care that I'm free." Freedom, I realized, wasn't about getting the house back. It wasn't about Susan apologizing. It was about owning my future again, even if I had to build it from the bottom, with trembling hands and a soul that refused to quit. There's something no one tells you about losing everything. You begin to see what actually matters. Not the house, not the furniture, not even the bank account. But your name, your worth, your voice. And when you get those back even just a little, you realize you were never really powerless. They just made you believe you were. After I filed the case, I expected everything to fall apart. Instead, something remarkable happened. The silence broke. A woman from the church I hadn't seen in years knocked on the shelter door one Sunday. Her name was Carol. She used to sit next to me every Easter. She brought me a warm shawl and a paper bag filled with cornbread and blueberry jam. She looked me in the eye and whispered, "I saw what they did to you, and I'm proud of you for standing up." I nearly wept, because it only takes one voice to make the darkness tremble. That week, 2 more women showed up at the shelter asking for me. They had their own stories. One had been locked out of her home after her son got her drunk and made her sign away the deed. Another's granddaughter used her Social Security to buy a car. Both thought they were alone. They weren't. We weren't. The shelter director, Ms. Alvarez, offered me something unexpected. "Ruth," she said, "would you like to lead a weekly session for the new women? Something gentle, just you talking. You're good at that." Me, a teacher. I almost laughed. But instead I said, "I'm not good at talking. I'm good at surviving." And maybe that's what they need to hear. Every Thursday, I sat in that dim room with folding chairs and paper cups of chamomile tea. And I told them pieces of my story, not just the pain, but the pieces that came after. The morning I looked in the mirror and didn't cry. The night I danced alone to old Motown records just to remember what joy tasted like. The moment I realized the greatest revenge wasn't a lawsuit, it was dignity. They took my house, my name on paper, my savings, but they didn't take my strength. Because you can't steal what you didn't give. And I never gave them my spirit. That belonged to me. Always had, always would. I ended that first Thursday circle with these words. We may be old, but we're not invisible. We may be tired, but we're not done. We may be broken, but we still burn. And in the silence that followed, I saw it. Tears, nods, hope, that quiet power. They couldn't steal it, because now it was spreading. A month after filing the case, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, just my name and the shelters. I knew that handwriting. Susan. My daughter. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Not because I expected kindness, but because I wasn't sure if I even wanted it. Still, I read, "Mom, I don't know where to begin. I'm not sure if you'll ever read this, but I hope you do. What I did, what we did, was wrong. I was scared. Rob said you were unstable, that you'd be better off somewhere where people could handle you. I believed him, and I didn't ask questions. I didn't listen to you. I didn't protect you. Now, I see your face all over the news. You've become a symbol, Mom. You're not hiding. You're fighting. And I don't know if I deserve to be your daughter anymore. But I am proud of you. I'm sorry. Susan." I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it, placed it in the back of my Bible, and whispered to no one in particular. I accept your words. But forgiveness. That's not a letter. That's a life. She said I was a symbol. Maybe that's true. But I didn't do any of this to be seen. I did it because I refused to disappear. And maybe that's what scared them the most, not that I was angry, but that I was still alive. A week later, the shelter organized the Voices of the Forgotten Event women from all over the city coming to share their stories. Guess who they asked to open? Me. I wore a plain blue dress and pinned my silver hair back. No makeup, no stage voice, just me. I looked out over that crowd, women in wheelchairs, walkers, cardigans, too big for their shoulders. And I said, they took our homes, our savings, our seats at the table, but not our memories. not our courage, not our truth. They took everything, but not our spirit. And the room erupted. Afterward, one of the younger volunteers came up to me in tears. My grandmother raised me. I haven't called her in 3 years. I'm going to call her tonight. And that meant more than any courtroom verdict ever could. Because this story, it wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. It was a rainy Tuesday when the hearing date arrived. The streets shimmered with silver puddles, and I remember thinking, even the sky feels heavy today. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Ms. Alvarez walked beside me up the courthouse steps, holding a tattered umbrella and humming something soft, almost like a hymn. Inside, everything smelled like old wood and quiet power. And when they called my name, Ruth Eleanor Matthews, I stood tall. For the first time in years, I felt my spine straighten like I was meant to be here. Susan was already seated with her lawyer. She didn't look at me, but I looked at her. Not with hate, with clarity, with years, with the strength of every scar she'd never seen. The judge, an older woman with silver streaks in her bun, asked if I wanted to speak. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need to. I just told the truth. I gave my life to my family. I sacrificed. I stayed. I endured. And when I had nothing left to give, they took the little I had. But here I am. Not for revenge, not for pity, but for justice. Because dignity doesn't expire with age, the courtroom was silent. Then the judge nodded slowly and said, "Thank you, Ms. Matthews." That took courage. They postponed the final ruling, but I had already won something bigger. That room heard me. That world saw me. And Susan. She finally looked at me, with tears in her eyes. Outside the courthouse, a young reporter asked if she could quote my words. I said yes, because truth needs echo. That evening, I returned to the shelter, sat with my tea, and watched the city lights blur through the window. I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was restoring a voice, not just mine, but every woman who thought she was too late, too old, too forgotten. They tried to silence me. They tried to erase me. But I was still here, and I was just getting started. 2 days after court, Susan showed up at the shelter. No cameras, no entourage. Just a tired woman in a trench coat holding a paper bag of oranges. I opened the door and said nothing. She stood there in the drizzle, eyes red. "I brought you fruit. I remembered you liked oranges," she whispered. I almost laughed. After everything, she thought oranges would fix it. But maybe it wasn't the fruit. Maybe it was the trying. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the corner where the walls had water stains and the chairs creaked. For 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to say this. I believed him. I believed you were losing your mind, that you were better off there." I nodded slowly. "You wanted to believe it," I replied, "because the truth would have made you responsible." She winced. I was scared. I had a mortgage, a job, kids. I looked at her and said the line I'd rehearsed for months. "I was your mother. I needed you. You chose convenience, and I survived anyway." She broke down crying, but I didn't move to comfort her. Because healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means telling the truth and letting it sit in the room like smoke. She left after an hour. No hugs, no promises, just a quiet, "If you ever want to talk again, I'll be around." I closed the door behind her, my chest heavier, but my soul clearer. Some apologies come too late. Some don't come at all. But I didn't need her to make me whole. I already was. Later that night, Ms. Alvarez handed me a note left anonymously in the community box. It read, "Because of you, I walked out of my son's house today. I told him I'm not his maid. I'm his mother. Thank you, Ruth." And just like that, my story had become a spark. They took everything, but not the fire. And that fire was catching. It started with a blog post. A young writer from a women's justice network asked to interview me after the hearing. I agreed, thinking it would be buried somewhere on page 9 of the internet. But within days, it went viral. The title: "They took everything from Ruth except her voice." I didn't expect the emails, or the voicemails, or the flowers that showed up at the shelter with notes like, "For my grandmother, who never got her moment. You gave me the strength to stand up to my brother. You reminded me that we don't shrink with age. We sharpen. Then came the calls from podcasts, university panels, even a local filmmaker. Everyone wanted to hear more. To know how an old woman without a bank account or a Facebook page could rattle cages built by money control and fear. But the truth, I hadn't changed the world. I'd just refused to be erased from it. Ms. Alvarez called me into her office one morning and said, "Ruth, a reporter from Channel 6 wants to do a segment on elder abuse survivors. They want you to be the face." I blinked. "Me? I'm not a face. I'm just a story." She smiled. "Exactly." A week later, I sat under bright studio lights with a microphone clipped to my sweater. And I told the world what I wished someone had told me 10 years ago. You are not too old to matter. You are not too late to be heard. And your story, it might just be the match someone else is praying for. When the segment aired, I didn't recognize myself at first. I looked strong, and not just in the physical sense, but in that way, only people who've been broken and built themselves back know how to be. That night, I stood by the shelter's window, watching the city pulse below, and whispered, "You tried to write me out, but I rewrote myself in." Because being forgotten wasn't the worst thing. Being silent was. And now, I was done with silence. It was a Sunday afternoon when I saw him again. Rob, my son-in-law, the man who'd orchestrated my isolation, the one who whispered to Susan that I was losing it, the one who handed me papers I couldn't read in the dim light of the kitchen saying, "Just sign this. Mom, it's for your protection." He walked into the same grocery store I was in, pushing a cart with his head low. I hadn't seen him in over a year. I stood still by the oranges, funny those oranges again, and watched him see me. He froze. I didn't. I stepped forward, calm shoulders, back eyes, steady. "Hello, Rob." He muttered my name like it burned his tongue. "Ruth, you didn't expect to see me here, did you?" I thought you were..." He trailed off. Gone, institutionalized, powerless. He looked down. He couldn't meet my gaze. And I felt no hate. Only truth. "You tried to make me disappear," I said softly, but firmly. "But I've never been more visible." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand. "You don't get to speak now. You had your say. This is my voice, and I won't waste it on you." And I walked away, not out of anger, but out of freedom. Because true revenge isn't screaming or slapping or suing, though sometimes those things are part of it. True revenge is walking past your oppressor unshaken. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "They took my home, my comfort, my peace. But they never took my essence, never my soul. And now they know I survived. And I remember." Sometimes people ask me if I believe in justice. I do, but not always in the way courts decide. I believe in living well, in speaking up when they expected you to vanish, in being radiant when they hoped you'd grow dim. And that day, in aisle 4 of the market, I was blazing. You'd think a city shelter with flickering lights and mismatched chairs wouldn't feel like home. But after everything I'd endured, that old building with its chipped walls and squeaky doors became a sacred space. Not because it was perfect, but because in that place I was seen, not silenced. Ms. Alvarez offered me more than a room. She offered me purpose. She said, "Ruth, we need someone to help the new women coming in. Someone who's lived it." At first I hesitated. What could I possibly give? But then I remembered the woman I used to be, curled up on a cot, eyes wide with grief, thinking her story had ended. And I realized, if I can be the voice I once needed, then I've already won. So I stayed. I cooked Sunday dinners for the women who missed their kids. I listened to midnight cries behind closed doors. I taught them how to write letters, journal their thoughts, reclaim their names. Some days I just sat and held a hand. Not every scar needs words. Some just need warmth. They began to call me Miss Ruth. And every time I heard it, something in me healed. Because I was no longer a burden. I was a beacon. One night, a young woman named Carla came to my room. Her husband had broken her nose 2 weeks prior. She said, "They say you're the strongest one here." I chuckled. "Baby strength doesn't come from muscles, it comes from getting back up." She whispered, "Do you think I'll ever be okay?" I looked her in the eyes and said, "You already are. You just haven't met the version of you that's waiting at the finish line." The shelter wasn't forever, but it was the bridge that saved me, not just from them, but from forgetting who I was. And every woman I helped reminded me, they didn't just try to take my spirit, They tried to break all of us. And still, here we stood, still rising. 3 months after the shelter became my second skin, a box arrived. No return address. Inside a stack of envelopes tied with a blue ribbon and a note that read, "These are yours. I found them in the attic. I'm sorry. Susan." I stared at the pile. Old letters. My letters. I untied the ribbon with trembling fingers. Each envelope bore my handwriting. Letters I had written while locked away in that nursing home, never knowing if anyone would read them. Letters to Susan. To my grandkids. To God. To myself. One read, "If you ever find this, please know I never stopped loving you. I just stopped trying to convince you." Another said, "I miss the sound of your laugh, even if it hasn't been for me in years." One was soaked in ink and tears. "I don't know who I am anymore, but I remember who I was. I hope you will too." I read them until sunrise. A past version of me whispering into a void finally heard. I laughed. I cried. And then I did something unexpected. I forgave her. Not because she asked, but because I was tired of carrying the ashes of a fire someone else started. That morning, I sat at the shelter's common room table and began writing again. But not to Susan. Not to anyone else, really. To the women. To those who hadn't yet found their voice. I began a memoir, a collection of truths, scabs, and all. I titled it, "They Took Everything, but Not My Spirit." Miss Alvarez helped me find a local printer. And within weeks, copies were passed around shelters across the city. It wasn't a bestseller, but it didn't need to be. It was a lifeline, a mirror, a voice in the dark that said, "You're not alone, you're not broken, and this is not the end." I may have lost years, money, family, but through those letters, I gained something more powerful, my story. And no one, not Susan, not Rob, not the silence, could take that from me. It was a gray, wind-swept Tuesday when I saw her again. Susan, my daughter. She stood outside the shelter's front gate clutching a bag of groceries like a peace offering from a life long gone. I watched her from the window for a long moment. Part of me wanted to turn away. The other part, the mother part, opened the door. She looked older than I remembered, eyes hollowed by regret, shoulders not as proud. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. 2 words I hadn't heard in years. 2 words that used to mean everything and then nothing. "Why now?" I asked. Calm, firm. She swallowed. "Because I read every letter. Because I know I didn't protect you. And because I didn't know who I became until I saw who you still were." I said nothing. Just let the silence sit between us like a third person, one we both had to face. "I brought soup," she offered, her voice cracking. "You think soup fixes betrayal?" I asked, not bitterly, just truthfully. "No," she replied, "but it's a start." We sat at a picnic bench behind the shelter. No cameras, no apologies rehearsed for effect. Just 2 women, one trying to undo harm, the other choosing whether to let healing begin. "They told me you were confused," Susan finally said. "Rob said you were unstable, that you signed everything willingly." "I did," I said, "because I trusted you." She flinched, then said the only thing that made sense. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm here." And for the first time in years, she was. I didn't invite her back into my life that day, but I let her sit with me. And that was more than she deserved, but exactly what I needed. Because forgiveness is never for the ones who ask for it. It's for the ones who deserve to be free. And I was tired of carrying chains. She left quietly. No promises, no grand gestures, just a quiet thank you. I stood under the sky and whispered, "You took everything from me, but not my ability to choose." And I chose peace on my terms. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the whispers started spreading. Women came to the shelter asking for Miss Ruth, not because I had all the answers, but because I listened, because I understood. Because my eyes had seen the same shadows theirs were crawling out of. A community college invited me to speak, then a local women's center, then a radio show. They all wanted to hear the grandmother who wouldn't break. I stood in front of strangers and told the story of how I lost everything, except my spirit. I never planned to be anyone's inspiration. I just wanted to survive. But something funny happens when you tell the truth. You become a mirror, and people start seeing their own strength reflected back at them. I met a young mother who said, "Your words made me walk away the night he raised his hand." Another whispered, I didn't even know I was worth saving until I heard your voice. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich, but I was free. And I had something far more powerful than pity. I had purpose. One night, I walked into my tiny apartment, the one I paid for with my own hands, earned by work I was proud of. On the wall, I hung a framed page from my book. It read, "They took everything, but not my spirit. And as long as I have that, I can rebuild it all." The old me, the one who begged to be seen, would have cried at how far we'd come. But I didn't cry. I smiled. Because healing doesn't always come in tears. Sometimes it comes in stillness. In knowing you didn't just make it out, you made it count. The women at the shelter still visit. Some bring babies. Others bring dreams. All of them bring proof that even when you're broken, you're not beyond becoming. And that more than anything is the story I'll keep telling. You can take her home, her money, her title, but you'll never take her fire. If you've made it this far, I want you to hear me clearly. This story isn't just mine. It's yours too. Because somewhere out there is another woman sitting in silence, another grandmother staring at a window, wondering if her best days are behind her. I was her, and I'm still here. There was a time I thought my name had no meaning. That all I'd ever be remembered for was being used, discarded, and forgotten. But I was wrong. Because every scar I carry now tells a story of survival, not shame. People ask me what I would have done differently. Here's the truth. I would have believed in myself sooner. I would have spoken louder when they tried to silence me. And I would have walked away the first time someone mistook my kindness for weakness. But I don't live in regret anymore. I live in reclamation. I've taken back my story, my dignity, my name. So if you're a mother, a grandmother, a woman who's been told she's too much, too old, too broken, don't listen. They don't know your fire. They don't know your chapter's still unwritten. They don't know how unbreakable you are. Let them take your house. Let them take your inheritance. But don't ever let them take your spirit. Because from that spark, you can build a new life, just like I did. And now, before I go, let me leave you with this. If you've ever loved, quietly suffered silently, or endured what no one saw, then please remember, you are worthy. You are powerful. And your story isn't over. Thank you for listening. Now go write your next chapter. With fire. With grace. With you, Miss Ruth.